She generally has she generally has better taste than me in all things. You know that scarf that I wear sometimes? People compliment me on it. I always say Evelyn picked it out for me. It's true. Well, in this case, I think I had more luck than she did.
Well, as I understand it, today we're just going to have a conversation. I've got a couple questions for you, and then we're also going to open it up to the audience. And because time is so short, we just ask that you keep your questions as succinct and concise as possible so that people have an opportunity to ask. But I mentioned earlier that as a 33-year community college administrator, job creation, automation, all of those things are just critically important to me. And I guess I wanted to first ask Evelyn, just as having worked in corporate America, having worked with small health startups, what is the meaning of doing work, and also the freedom dividend? How does that enable us to help find jobs?
Okay, so first I think the definition of work needs to change because there's so many kinds of work that are unrecognized in our society today, like the work I do at home and the work of so many caregivers across our country, whether it be for children or for elderly, aging parents, even creatives, the writers, the artists, all of their work has value, and the freedom dividend finally attributes some value, some economic value to the work that they're already doing. So that would be my definition of work, is really anything that you're doing in service of others or another cause. And how the freedom dividend would, what was your second question?
Well, would that enable us to find
Sure.
work
Okay.
and do work?
Well, I think the freedom dividend is $1,000 a month in every American's hands is such a powerful tool to supercharge our economy. If you think about it, most people will be spending that money in their local economies. And that means that your local eateries, your local shops will now have more resources and more money to hire and more jobs to fill. So that's one from like a macro level. And also, I think it does give individuals more ability to choose the kinds of jobs they want because now they have something to fall back on. So it's not so much of just taking any job because they're afraid of starving or being out on the street. They now can, they can turn down a job that they hate or that exploits them, perhaps, or that crushes their soul, instead of just feeling like they need to put up with it. And that's really powerful on so many levels. I think unions are a really good example of that, and having, that extra bargaining power because they can fall back on this, freedom dividend and hold out for a better contract. And I think the last thing that I think is a very important concept around the freedom dividend and work is I think so many Americans are stuck in this, it's almost like this welfare trap where they have these benefits that they're afraid to lose if they work. And as a society, we should be encouraging people to be as productive as they possibly can without fear of losing these critical benefits. And, it's beyond just this generation. It's like having this mindset of really being able to get ahead versus holding yourself back and holding your family back. And I think that over time will be so transformative.
What do you think jobs of the future will look like? You talk about a more inclusive definition of work in general.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the buzzword to that right now is like coding. And I'm not going to say coding because, I think the computers in the future will code themselves. In fact, they're already coding themselves. It's called machine learning. And to think that humans are going to be better at computer language than computers themselves probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But the kinds of jobs, and Andrew has talked about this a lot, is jobs that aren't very easily automated. So jobs that involve trade skills, like being an electrician or a plumber, it's hard to imagine a robot showing up at your house and then helping you do plumbing work, because those sort of tasks are not reliably like repetitive. You know, and you know, I think the future of work is also going to be more creative than we think. You know, for one, caregiving, you know, that interaction with people, our children can always use more quality human interaction, and our elderly population, they also need quality care from humans. So I think those jobs will be insulated, and the creative jobs around the arts, it's something that I feel so passionately about in our schools. Just not just training our kids to be coders, for example, and focusing on standardized tests. It's really encouraging their creativity and imagination so that they're prepared for the real jobs of the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Andrew, you talk a lot about the impact of automation on jobs, and again, in my experience in the community college, I saw this increasing skills gap. And if you would address that.
Sure. First, I want to recognize Mary for her incredible work in the community. Let's give her a round of applause. You've done really awesome on so many levels. And you are at the front lines of it at the community college. You are seeing the kind of training that the students needed and what the employers were looking for, and there was often a gap. What we need to do is invest in trade and apprenticeship vocational programs at the high school level, so that by the time they reach community college, they might already have had years in the shop getting conversant with equipment repair, whatever it is that the employer is looking for. And then they'll be much more able to, as Evelyn was saying, have jobs that are going to be with us for a long time, because there are many employers here in Iowa and around the country that are looking for skilled tradespeople and technicians and can't find them. And what have we done for our young people? We have oversold college. We've said college, college, college. Coding, I mean, coding is a whole other thing. So college has gotten 2.5 times more expensive, and the message many of our kids have gotten is like, well, that's still what I must do. And then families have felt like they have no choice but to pay whatever the price is, so they take out these massive loans. So you're up to $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. All of these people who are going to college that probably should not have headed in that direction. So if you look at the numbers, and I'm a numbers guy, most of you probably know that, 6% of American high school students are in technical and vocational tracks. In Germany, that's 59%. Think about that gulf, 6%, 59%. So we know we need to invest in getting that 6% up as quickly as possible. And in America today, we always do the easy, less expensive thing, unfortunately. It's easier and cheaper to throw kids in a classroom with some textbooks and a teacher and say, hey, you're all going to go to college, than it is to invest in the tools and the shops and the trainers and the relationship to employers that we should be investing in. As your president, I will do everything I can to elevate the trades. I will have a public awareness campaign with Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs. We'll go around saying like, hey, these are really great jobs, and make it so that by the time someone is hitting the workforce, they've actually been training for years instead of having to start from scratch.
Another question I had was that you talk a lot about how headline unemployment is a misleading measurement.
Oh, yeah, it's so dumb.
And so what kind of measurements should we be looking at when we talk about jobs?
If you flash back to several years ago, even Donald Trump, when he was running for president, he said headline unemployment's fake news. Y'all remember that? You remember him saying this? And then he became president, all of a sudden it became real. He was right the first time. The headline unemployment rate doesn't include you if you drop out of the workforce and stop looking. If you stop looking, you actually improve the unemployment rate. I don't know how many of you knew that. Right now, the labor force participation rate in the United States of America is at a multi-decade low, about 63%, the same levels as El Salvador and Costa Rica. That does not show up in the headline unemployment rate. Also not showing up if you're doing 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, if you're underemployed, if you're in a temp gig or contract job that does not have benefits. All of that just says employed. So it's obscuring all of this weakness in our labor market, and it's not the only thing. you're all having the same experience I'm sure many other Americans have had, which is like you get all these headlines saying things are going great, and then you look around your families and communities and like, why does it not seem like things are going great? You are right, the numbers are wrong. Headline unemployment, vastly misleading. GDP, totally unrelated to how we're doing. If you look at the important indicators, you see that we're experiencing record high levels of stress, financial insecurity, student loan indebtedness, mental illness, even suicide and depression. Those are all either at record highs or multi-decade highs in the United States. But you don't see that in the headlines. You just see headline unemployment really low. As your president, I will line up the measurements to actually tell us how we are really doing in our communities. And then you would see we have a skills gap, we have a mental health crisis, we have a wellness recession. You can't solve problems if you don't identify them first. And it starts with having the right numbers and getting away from this headline unemployment rate that's out of date at best and completely misleading at worst.
A follow-up question to that, and based on where we're sitting today here at Optime at the Cole Palace, that hires individuals with abilities at varying levels, what would you do as president to make sure that there's access to jobs for people of all abilities?
And thank you again for the work that you've done in this space, Mary, because I know that you and the Cole Palace are looking out for people who might have more needs than others. Your challenge, our challenge right now in 30 days is to rewrite the rules of our economy to work for our people of every capacity. And we talk about our son who's autistic. I know many of us here in this room today have people with special needs in our families. Special needs children often grow up to become special needs adults. And right now we are confusing economic value and human value and saying they're the same thing, and they are not. And so the position we're left in is that if someone is has a disability, then you say, well, like, you're worthless, and then that person's going to struggle their entire life. We have to change that mindset, and this is, believe it or not, a mindset. We can actually say we all have intrinsic value as Americans and human beings and citizens, and that goes for our son, that goes for the people that you're talking about, Mary, where if you insist on saying the market is right about how much we're valued, then you wind up in impossible situations trying to turn coal miners into coders, which is totally ridiculous, by the way. It's insane that we're even talking in those terms. And the only reason you would talk in those terms is if you believe that the market is right about everything. That if the market says the coal mining town has no value, then it has no value, and then we're going to try and turn them into coders who do have value. What we have to say is that we all have value regardless of the skills, education, abilities that we bring to the table, because the market is zeroing out more and more of us independent of what we traditionally have brought to our employers. And what I mean by that is that we're automating away the most common jobs in our country, and it's not just truck drivers, retail workers, call center workers. It's also going to be radiologists, accountants, lawyers. I was an unhappy lawyer for 5 months, which was still long enough for me to say with conviction that you can automate away a lot of that job, because software and artificial intelligence can edit that contract more quickly and cheaply than even the most talented human attorney. So we have to think bigger about how we make an economy that works for everyone. And that is our challenge in the next 30 days. It's one reason why I love being here in Iowa, because you all have the power to shape the future of this country. I know it doesn't feel like it because you're living your lives, minding your business. I did the math. Do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? 1,000 Californians each. So if you look around this cafe, what's the fire code here at the Cole Palace? So let's say, I'm going to give a Trumpian estimate. let's say there are 400 people in this room. No, I'm kidding. But even in this room, there's the equivalent of 2 football stadiums full of Californians. That's the power to shape the future of this country that we have gathered here right now. This is the mission, this is the vision that we have to take to the rest of the country as soon as possible, to say we have to rewrite the rules to work for ourselves and our kids. If it's not working for you, it's not working. And we have to say once and for all that we have value independent of what the market is telling us. Because if we listen to the market for too long, it's going to destroy us. It's going to take us off a cliff. And we're going to be left looking around wondering what happened to our communities.
I don't know if there are any other remarks you want to make or turn it over to your audience for some questions.
I would love some questions, and I'm sure Evelyn would as well. We really appreciate you all being here today. It's so deeply immoral that we are allowing hunger and deprivation at this scale in our country. We are the richest, most advanced country in the history of the world. We're up to $21 trillion and counting in terms of our wealth each year. And one of the things that drives me nuts as a citizen, do you all remember voting for the $4 trillion bailout of Wall Street 10 years ago? Do you remember anyone looking around saying, where are we going to get the money for that? But somehow they'll make an argument that we don't have enough money to feed the poor. It's criminal. It's immoral. That is why we have to retake our government to work for us again and stop serving the banks and the lobbyists and the corporate interests that have overrun the place. Really, Washington, D.C. today is the richest city in our country. What do they produce? No one knows, really. That's a thinker. That's a rhetorical question. They produce lobbyists. They produce bad decisions. They produce gridlock and dysfunction. The truth is the folks in D.C. succeed whether we succeed or fail. And that is what we have to change. We have to restore the feedback, that mechanism that should exist between the people and our government. No moral government would be cutting SNAP benefits to families while Amazon pays zero in taxes and while we're bailing out banks to the tune of trillions of dollars.
Can I also just comment that I think Andrew is the only one addressing poverty in this race in any meaningful way with a basic income, because that would literally eradicate poverty among our citizens. And it's something that I feel like we have a moral obligation as a country to do, and we can absolutely afford it. So it's a little crazy to me that the other politicians haven't jumped on this as I thought they would.
When Evelyn and I were talking about my running for president, she was like, hey, I'm on board, but you should know that as soon as you get out there and talk about universal basic income or the freedom dividend, she's like, every other major politician will pick it up immediately. And then I will say, well, I certainly hope so. That would make me very happy. And I was like, wow,
and then you can come home.
Yeah, and then she said, then you can come home. And so I said, wow, if it's going to be that easy to eradicate poverty, this is going to be great. Yeah. But I actually knew something Evelyn did not, which is that career politicians would never have the courage or vision to just come out and say that we should eradicate poverty because they think it's bad for business. Honestly, it's one reason why what is common sense to all of us, that of course we should be taking care of our people, is just so hard for a career politician to say in a real way. They'll say it in a symbolic way. But if you say, hey, maybe we should just cut to the chase and just start putting money into people's hands, then they hem and they haw. For whatever reason, they don't seem to trust our people. It's very odd to me. They'll trust a bank, they'll trust an institution, but they won't trust human beings and families to actually solve our own problems if we have the resources and means to do so.
Actually, that led in exactly where I
is that it will enable people to actually keep the jobs they have, even if they're crappy jobs. Because right now, so much of society is one sick kid away from losing their job. They don't have a car that functions to get to their job. They don't have some backup thing if their child gets sick and they need to take care of that. That is a huge thing. And it's not just about these individual peoples or the moral argument. It's a societal thing.
Yeah.
That the entire society, every single person will benefit if everyone else is doing well. That was one point. And then the other one was about something that everybody I think you can relate to is the size of class sizes. That class sizes are gigantic.
Too big.
You have them stand up so we can hear back here.
Oh, sorry.
Wow, I've never been told that. On. So the first one was just about poverty and people not being able to keep their jobs because they don't have enough money to have childcare if their child gets sick, or to get to their job if their car is malfunctioning, or have a functioning transportation of any kind. That's the first point. And then the second point is just about class sizes and how our children these days are in classes with 30 or 40 kids and not getting what they need from the teachers and from the educational system. And every study has shown that the kids produce better in their grades, they're better in school, there's more harmony if we have things like recess and art and music. And those are the first things that go on the chopping block because people want to save money. But it's like shooting yourself in the head because you're making it impossible to succeed at actually teaching your children.
Are you an educator yourself? You feel like it. In a good way.
No, but my husband is autistic, and your son can have a wonderful wife.
So I just want to reinforce what you just said about class sizes and doing more for our kids in schools. We need to pay teachers more, number one. And that's clearly in the numbers. A good teacher is worth his or her weight in gold in terms of improved educational outcomes over dozens of students. Then we need to have more teachers in the classrooms to reduce the class sizes, and you have more individualized support for kids who have distinct needs. The third, or each kid. The third thing you have to do is lighten up on the standardized tests. Did you know we invented the SAT during World War II as a means to identify which kids not to send to the front lines? And now we treat our kids like every year is wartime. Does that make sense to anyone? And if you're a teacher, it ends up distorting your behavior in various ways. You're teaching to various tests, and you're not serving the kids' interests. The fact is our kids mature at different rates. Like we have to stop trying to treat the schools like assembly lines and make it so that you have distinct paths afterwards, so it's not like everyone's, again, supposed to go to college. Like there needs to be fruitful paths that are not college. And I think the Democratic Party is making a mistake by saying that college is the answer for everyone, because only a third of Americans are going to graduate from college. That's a relatively stable percentage. It is not going to shoot up from a third to two-thirds. If anything, by over-prescribing college, you know what we've done? We've brought down the college completion rate to 59% in 6 years. 41% of people who start don't finish within 6 years, which shows that part of that's financial, but part of that's because some of them are not in the right place. So I couldn't agree with you more about class sizes. And here's the big message about education K through 12. The data clearly shows that educators, as incredible as they are, can only control about a third of our kids' educational outcomes. What are the other two-thirds? Parental time spent with a child, words read to them when they're young, stress levels in the house, income, neighborhood. These variables account for two-thirds of our kids' educational performance. Teachers know this. You go into a teacher and say, hey, educate our kids, and you're like, well, I can control about a third of it. And then they're like the other two-thirds, they disappear in the summer, they come back, like hopefully something good happened that summer. So by putting money into homes and families, we'll give our kids an honest chance to learn in many, many situations, and then the teachers a much better chance to teach. But it involves investing in our families at the ground floor from day one.
You mentioned something about in high school trades. Okay, when I Okay, you know, we had
You look great. I can't believe you graduated from high school 44 years ago.
we had the workshop, well-being, home economics. You don't see that no more. I mean, would you appoint somebody that is for education, secretary that?
I couldn't agree more that we need to be teaching our kids practical things that aren't purely academic. So obviously technical and vocational I would invest mightily in, but also I would invest in financial literacy. I think that's very important, particularly in a society where they're going to get $1,000 a month when they turn 18. Like, you think they'll pay attention to that? One thing I've learned is that it's very hard to teach financial literacy to someone who does not have money. Like, if you have some steady income, then financial literacy makes a lot more sense. Social and emotional learning, I think, would be very positive. We have to managing technology, because the fact is a lot of our kids are getting depressed by their phones, and that's very clear in the data. So we have to try and teach our kids things that are relevant. Shop, home ec, and other things, and arts, all very, very positive. And I'd invest in them. I also think phys ed and sports very positive in terms of kids' outcomes. So, you know, we have to stop pretending like we're going to turn our kids into supercomputers. We're not. We have to turn them into human beings. Am I right?
And I just want to say how impressed I've been in Iowa. You have this science center that we've taken our kids to now a number of times during our travels here, and they let our kids use a saw and a power drill. And it is so amazing, and they love it, and you can just see the learning that comes from it, just using your hands and building something, and I've not seen it anywhere else. So thank you, Iowa, for that gift.
Yeah. So the way that the federal government can help is by putting resources to work to support various goals, not mandating them. Like, you go to the community and say, hey, if you want to offer these things, we will put resources to work to help you do so. And then the community says, wow, I would like to have more trade programs, and then there are federal funds available for me. So I'm not someone who thinks that you can do a one-size-fits-all type edict, especially at a DC. It's more saying, look, here are things that we want to support as a country, and if a community decides to pursue that, then it's not going to come out of your budget; it's going to come out of ours. Like woodshop or financial literacy, or some of these other things that we can help, but we would not mandate or require. To me, a community is best suited to figure out what its kids need. Certainly, we have a very large, diverse country. You know, it's like you can have goals at the federal level, but you should not be mandating them to communities around the country.
I've been told that we're out of time for any questions, but I would just like to ask everyone again to really give a warm Southeast Iowa welcome to Evelyn and Andrew.
Thank you.
And to thank him for raising the questions and the issues that we don't hear from every presidential candidate, but that have equal value. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's give Mary another round of applause for helping make this happen. And I want to make a personal appeal. If you believe that this is a vision that you want to fight for and leave to our kids, we need you to caucus in 30 days. You can make an enormous difference because you all have the future of the country in your hands. And I want to be able to look my kids in the eye and say, we did everything we could to leave you a country we're still proud of. Thank you very much. So great seeing you all.